Hi folks, this is Tristan from Scalar Music. In this video we're taking a deep dive into Carbon Electra 2, which is a musical software synthesizer that combines classic and modern synthesis power with musical intelligence. The original Carbon Electra synth remains renowned for its rich sound, super easy workflow, and surprising depth. With Carbon Electra 2, we've kept everything that made the original special, whilst giving it a complete modern and musical overhaul. With new oscillator types, a new musical filter, a built-in note and chord sequencer, plus a powerful new scale lock mode, which keeps the entire synthesizer musically consistent with your selected scale. Just like the original, Carbon Electra 2's layout is very straightforward and intuitive, with 4 oscillators on the left side, now with classic, wavetable, and all new wave terrain modes. Oscillators run through a central mixer section where you can balance their levels and access the routing page to choose which oscillators run through which filters and in what order. To the right are pan controls for each oscillator to control stereo width, as well as the amplifier envelope for controlling the volume characteristics. Beneath this we have a classic style multi-mode filter with adjustable slope and overdrive, as well as a brand new musical filter, which we'll look at a bit later. To the right are 4 modulation sources, with 3 LFOs and 1 modulation envelope generator. These are all freely assignable to any destination, however the mod envelope is pre-routed to the filter's cutoff frequency, with a dedicated knob for controlling mod amount. To create a mod routing, just click and drag one of the 4 assigned slots from any mod source onto the destination parameter. Then you can adjust the modulation amount either via the destination or via the source. You can assign multiple mod sources to the same destination and choose via the settings how they interact. For example, in the multiplier mode, with 2 LFOs modulating the filter cutoff frequency, one is effectively modulating the other's modulation amount. So there are plenty of creative routing possibilities. Clicking the Advanced button opens the lower half of the interface, containing the Effects section, Sequencer, and Master section. There are 5 effect slots which are all customizable and reorderable, as well as modulatable. The sequencer section consists of the shape sequencer on the top, which can be assigned to up to 3 modulation destinations, and the note and chord sequencer beneath. We'll look at both of these a little later. There are also hundreds of factory and artist presets included for you to explore. These are organized into various categories with selectable tags. Let's take a closer look at the oscillator section now. Each oscillator has a classic mode, which, like Carbon Electra 1, mimics the sound of a classic analog synthesizer with all the typical virtual analog wave shapes. Unison can be enabled for each oscillator with customizable unison voices, detune amount, and panning controlled via the master section. Oscillators 2 through 4 feature an FM control, which cascades from one oscillator to the next, and works great for classic FM type sounds, as well as more extreme distorted type of effects. Using the top drop-down menu, you can change any oscillator into wavetable mode. And there are plenty of included wavetables for you to experiment with. Or you can import your own wave files via the settings menu. The third oscillator type is wave terrain, which is an entirely different oscillator concept. Wave terrains take a 2D image and convert them into a 3D terrain map, where brightness is interpreted as height. The oscillator then traces a path around this 3D surface, generating all sorts of unique and complex timbres. The radius control determines how far across the surface the oscillator travels. A larger radius value generally results in a brighter, more complex sound. We can also increase the size of the terrain for a deeper, richer sound. Wave train oscillators use two independent scanning paths across the terrain image. By default, you're controlling path 1, but if you click the 2 button, you switch over to controlling path 2. Both paths have their own pitch, tune, and radius controls. These two paths work together to create one final combined path, and that's what you see in the display on the right. By offsetting the pitch or radius of the two paths, you can create all sorts of complex, evolving, and sometimes unpredictable timbres. If you click the link button in the middle, both paths move together. This makes it easy to pitch the entire wave train oscillator up or down while keeping their relative relationship intact. There are plenty of included wave terrains to get you started, but you'll likely have a lot of fun importing your own images to use as terrains. One of Carbon Electra 2's most exciting and powerful features is scale lock. Enabling scale lock transforms the whole synthesizer, including oscillators, filter, and sequencer, locking them to your selected scale. You can enable scale lock using the toggle button in the top of the interface. Once enabled, we can open the scale browser and select a scale such as the minor scale, also referred to as Aeolian mode. Then use the small keyboard on the left to select a scale root note. Let's start with C for the C minor scale. This keyboard then blacks out all of the notes outside of the C minor scale. And with scale lock enabled, we're no longer able to play those notes. Any notes outside of C minor are automatically transposed to the nearest scale note. Scale lock also affects the oscillator's tuning in an incredibly useful way. With scale lock disabled, an oscillator's pitch control adjusts the pitch up or down in semitones, which is great for tuning oscillators an octave apart, or maybe even a fifth apart. But selecting almost any other interval does become musically restrictive. For example, with my oscillators tuned 3 semitones apart, playing the note C results in the notes C and E flat. So it's a nice minor third interval when playing in the key of C minor, the notes being 3 semitones apart. But if I play another note from the C minor scale, such as E flat, now we're hearing the notes E flat and G flat, which doesn't sound right because that second note G flat is not part of the C minor scale. A more appropriate interval for this note would be E flat and G natural, which are 4 semitones apart. So in order to hear that interval, I'd have to tune my second oscillator up 4 semitones rather than 3 semitones. But now when I move back to playing the note C, I hear the wrong interval. But with scale lock enabled, the oscillator pitch control now moves in scale degrees. So with oscillator 2 set to +2 scale degrees, it will always play the note 2 scale degrees up from whatever note oscillator 1 is playing, which will either be 3 or 4 semitones depending on the note and selected scale. So here's an example of playing a melody over a C minor chord progression with scale lock off and the second oscillator tuned up to a fixed 3 semitone interval. So as you can hear, some notes sound nice and others not so nice. So let's try that same example again, but with scale lock enabled and the second oscillator tuned up 2 scale degrees. As another example, here's a classic house type sound which uses a fixed interval for oscillator tuning. This is perfect for classic house type tracks, but possibly less useful for other musical genres given that static fixed interval. But now we can switch on scale lock mode and instantly hear the musicality that introduces. Or we can try that same sound in a minor key. Scale lock is also great for easily playing complex chords. With scale lock disabled, we can create one-finger chords by tuning oscillators to different pitches. With 4 oscillators tuned to +0, +3, +7, and +10 semitones respectively, I get a nice C-7 chord just by playing the note C. But if I play any other note other than C, I get that same static chord pitched up or down in semitones, otherwise known as parallel transposition. In which case, I'll end up with all sorts of notes outside of the C minor scale, making for not so musical sounding progressions. Here's an example of that static C-7 chord shape played across a few different keys over a basic C minor bass line. With scale lock enabled, however, each oscillator will retune itself based on the note I play to make sure I always end up with chords compatible with the C minor scale. Scale lock also plays a vital role in the sequencer section as well as the musical filter section, which we'll look at a bit later in the video. As mentioned, Carbon Electra 2 includes both a classic style multi-mode filter as well as a scalar EQ inspired musical filter. By clicking the routing button in the oscillator mixer section, we can enable or bypass either filter for each of the 4 oscillators and also reorder them by dragging and dropping. Signal flow runs upward from each oscillator at the bottom through the filters, so by default they hit filter 1 first, with filter 2 bypassed. With filter 1 in low pass mode, you'll hear 2 very different sounds moving from 12 dB mode to the steeper ladder style 24 dB mode. Plus, the overdrive control can add a nice amount of natural saturation to your sound. In addition to high pass and band pass modes, you'll also find the vowel filter returning from Carbon Electra 1, which is great for creating all sorts of vocal type effects. Then we can click the number 2 button to access the controls for filter number 2, which is the musical filter. Another very exciting addition to Carbon Electra 2. Inspired by the Scalar EQ plugin, this filter uses a bank of bandpass filters feeding into resonators. With the focus knob fully clockwise, we only hear the output of the filter, which is great for softer organ-like tones. Dialing the focus knob back blends in the dry residual signal. This is great for more subtle effects, like adding some resonant low-end weight to the sound. The density control lets us decide how many filter bands are added around the root note. And we can use the window control to roll off the levels away from the center. The resonance control adjusts the width of the filters to emphasize the resonant pitch, and also introduces a natural amount of decay to the sound. You can use the offset knob to shift the entire filter bank up or down in semitones. Keep in mind that the musical filter is a resonator. It doesn't create any new frequencies. It only boosts harmonics which are already present in the oscillator's waveform. Now let's open the advanced section and explore some of the sequencer features. On top is the shape sequencer, which is another assignable modulation source similar to the LFOs or mod envelope, but great for more rhythmic and tempo synchronized modulation effects. Here, for example, I have the shape sequencer assigned to modulate the filter cutoff frequency. Click on a step to select a shape from the menu on the left. Then drag that step up or down to adjust that step's modulation depth. Or you can click and drag to paint the selected shape across multiple steps. I also have the sequencer's trigger mode set to MIDI. This means each time I play a MIDI note, it triggers the shape sequencer from the start. But with the trigger mode set to host, the shape sequencer will run when I play my DAW, letting me play notes or chords over the top. Plus, if we have notes or chords programmed into the sequencer beneath, we can adjust the playback speed of the shape sequencer relative to the chord sequencer. For example, either double or half speed. There are also plenty of presets included for both the shape sequencer and the melodic sequencer, which you can freely change without affecting your sound. The melodic sequencer has many different modes and options, so I'll go through a few of these now. The default sequencer mode is Note, where we can select a scale and program a sequence using notes of that scale. Plus there's also a chromatic mode, in which we're not restricted to the notes of a scale. Or with scale lock enabled, note mode automatically works within your selected scale. We can click and drag to move around notes, or use double click to delete notes. We can extend notes to be longer than one step, or use the length control to shorten all of our sequence notes. You can also hold down the Control key on Windows or the Option key on macOS while resizing or moving notes to bypass grid snapping for finer adjustments. Pressing the Edit button lets us adjust certain parameters for each sequence note, depending on which sequencer mode we're using. In Note mode, we can transpose our notes up or down in either semitones or octave. We can also hold down the Command or Control key while clicking and dragging in the grid to select multiple notes. Now any adjustments we make apply to all of the selected notes, or you can press Delete to delete all the selected notes. We can also move the start and end markers to adjust the overall length of the sequence. There are also several transpose modes available, which are only in effect when trigger mode is either set to MIDI or host plus MIDI. Transpose modes determine how your sequence notes react to incoming MIDI notes. With transpose set to none, your sequence will always play back at the original program pitch with no transposition. With scale lock disabled, we can choose from two transpose modes, Note and Scale. Note is the traditional sequencer transposition mode, which transposes the entire sequence up or down by a fixed number of semitones. Playing the MIDI note C3 or middle C plays the sequence back at its original pitch. For each note we play above or below middle C, the whole sequence is transposed up or down by semitones. The problem here being we inevitably end up with lots of out-of-scale notes, really limiting its overall musical usefulness. Here, for example, is a bass line accompanied by a chord progression in traditional note transpose mode. So listen out for those out-of-scale notes. But in scale transpose mode, which is the only available option with scale lock enabled, sequence notes are transposed up or down in scale degrees, meaning no matter what note we use to trigger the sequence, we always end up with notes consistent with our selected scale. So this is great for taking a simple 16-step melodic idea, like a melody or a bass line, and adapting that idea across different chord changes within a song without sacrificing musicality. Now let's change over to chord sequencer mode. Now every note we program is actually an entire chord. The default chord type is a triad, meaning that we'll either get a major or a minor triad depending on our selected scale and our sequence note. For example, with D minor scale selected, programming the note D results in a D minor triad, or programming the note C results in a C major triad. But we can right-click on any of these chords to select a different chord type, such as 7th, 9th, or suspended. Regardless of the chord type we select, we'll always end up with diatonic chords perfectly fitting our selected scale. In chord mode, clicking the Edit button allows us to move the chord up or down in octaves, or invert the chord, which rearranges the note positions, and also enable parallel substitution. For example, changing a D minor chord to a D major chord, which allows us to access chord notes outside of the selected scale. So this is one of the very few exceptions where scale lock doesn't entirely prevent out-of-scale notes from occurring. So it's a very powerful and flexible sequencer, but with scale lock enabled, you'll almost always end up with nice, pleasant, musical sounding results. So this has been a deep dive into Carbon Electra 2. It's a very powerful and very musical synthesizer that we're tremendously excited about. So thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more videos from Scalar Music coming soon.